The Dragon Lord Legacy Chapter 2 Awakening. The morning came soon after, for Spike felt the new day in his mind, body, and soul. His eyes blurred as he opened them, bringing the vision of his mother's large arms encasing him in a protective half-circle. He yawned softly, exposing his white purling sharp teeth before closing his mouth. Looking up, he saw his mother and Mama both asleep, still snoring lightly. His Mama still had her head over his mother, leaving him alone in his thoughts. He then began to look around to find something to do. He kept wondering why yesterday they wanted him to remember his past. He knew what he needed to, right? He had two mothers, he was a dragon, he was a teenager, and he was a teenager, but with no memories of himself as a hatchling. He couldn't recall much of life prior to yesterday. Vague memories come to mind, seeing himself as a short, pudgy dragon. He also remembers other dragons too. Some that come to mind were Sapphire, Light Pink, and a few other giant ones. He also remembered names like his mother, Eliinsa, and his mama, Zinthia. He remembered Night? Bright? No, that didn't seem right. Might? No, but the name felt really important for him to remember. He realized that he wouldn't get much of his memory, if that is what his mother was asking for, just by sitting around and doing nothing, especially if he were to stay inside the cave all day. He slowly moved away from his mother's forearms, pushing against the ground with his front claws while raising his hind legs. A couple of cracks and stretches went through his spine. He then slowly settled his back end while sitting, then slowly began to twist to the left until he cracked bones, then to the right with the same sound. Spike cracked his head lastly, sending shivers down his spine for one final time. He had to learn these yesterday after being asleep for so long, and according to his mother's, he had been asleep for 8 months. After some sort of accident, his mother's explained that he fell into a short coma. What the accident it was, they did not get to explain. He slowly stood to his two hind legs, shakily and carefully standing up and standing tall, using his tail and wings to balance. The movements and sounds were enough to wake his mother up. Violet eyes slowly revealed themselves, and she saw her son standing up, struggling a bit to move upright.
My son?
She said softly, almost startled. Spike wobbled and looked to his mother, giving a smile. Good morning, Mother. She gave a smile and yawned softly before replying.
Good morning, son. What has you up early?
He thought about it and answered. I'm trying to remember the past. His mother seemed uncomfortable when she heard that. She turned her head slightly and muttered lightly to Zinthia's ear. He saw his mama groan softly, lifting her head of Elienza's head and laid it onto her forearms, while keeping her eyes closed. One detached from her lover, Elienza, and she slowly rose to her feet. Spike watched as his mother stood stories above him, even with his growth spurt, and gave a couple stretches. Yawning once more, she motioned for her son to follow. The young dragon walked alongside his mother, though she still walked slower due to her size, and they both headed to the entrance of the cave. Spike could smell a variety of different scents filling his nostrils. His eyes saw details with the strong light outside, and he could hear the sounds of other dragons from the outside world. He slowed to a snail's pace at the entrance, seeing the world bright and loud for him. His mother's cave was located towards the back end of the Dragonlands, on top of a plateau and an overview of the valley. The morning sunlight came from the eastern side, facing them directly. He had to put his hands to shield his eyes, and fortunately, his mother provided some cover using her wing to directly cover him overhead. Seeing her wing, he managed to look up at her, seeing conflict in her eyes. Mother? She looked down at him and finally sat on her haunches, bending her into a curve so part of the sun didn't hit him directly but still gave him a view of the world.
Tell me, son,
she began, her eyes sparkling with the sun's shine.
Do you remember anything at all? Prior today and yesterday?
He tried once more, but his mind was fuzzy and blurred by emotions. He shook his head. I don't, Mother. He then looked at her sadly. Why can't I remember anything? He then followed up with, why did I have an accident? Did that damage me? Am I broken? Just as he quickly said that, she brought her head down to his, brushing it against him.
No, my son, no. You are not broken,
she affirmed strongly.
You are anything but broken.
Then, why can't I remember anything? He sniffed, feeling his eyes slowly well up. Why can't you tell me what happened to me? What happened to make me lose my mind? She wished that she could tell him. She wished that she could tell him everything, but she knew that that would break him. To know that he was in the trials to become something more than the Dragon Lord's consort. That he had to fight both of his mothers prior to him losing his mind. The fact that he actually physically hurt the one that he loved, violently. All that nearly killed him. But the truth of it all, the one that burned her the most was that he was not really her son, and that he was raised by ponies instead.
My son...
She tried to think of something that could ease him into it.
Well, what you went through, what happened to you, will be explained. I know you want to know everything, but right now, I think your mind is too fragile, too delicate, and I don't want to overwhelm you. I don't want to lose you again.
Again? He asked, staring up at her sadness. How did you lose me before? The question tugged at her heartstrings, and she was heavily conflicted. Perhaps if she had help, maybe, or an advisor on her own, she could? She paused at that and realized perhaps if he had some sort of old memory, some sort of key to his past that he could latch onto, he would be able to gain his memories back. It might be risky, but it would probably be better than her to tell him everything at once. Leaning closer to him, she spoke softly.
Do you remember Ember?
Ember? He thought of it, the name sounding so familiar and so warm, but when he tried to think of the dragon in question, it was a blur, so he shook his head. She cursed inwardly at that. She hoped that maybe that would trigger something, but it seems for naught. Perhaps it was that time that Ember would be aware of her consort's awakening. If he saw her in front of her and physically, it would help him. She saw a pair of dragons flying overhead, low enough for her to call to them.
You, there!
She roared to them. The pair of dragons looking down and saw the advisor of the Dragonlands calling.
Please, send a word to Dragon Lord Ember. It is of utmost importance that she comes to hear the call of the advisor.
Knowing it was a rule to listen to the advisor just like listening to the Dragon Lord, the pair of dragons nodded and quickly took off. Dragon Lord Ember? Spike asked. Is she the one I'm supposed to remember?
She is, my son. Though my hopes is that she will provide the help that you need in your life. The one that may help your memories.
When the message was sent, Spike had retreated inside to alert his mama of the approaching Dragon Lord. Though, with how quick dragons were, it was no surprise that the arrival of the Dragon Lord was quick, though she did not come alone. At the entrance, Elianza waited for Ember and her horde to arrive. She saw the Sapphire Dragoness carrying the Bloodstone Scepter, along with her light purple and orange horde, come flying in rapid succession. The three landed gently with them approaching the advisor and bowing. Elianza returned the bow and gave them a warm smile.
Dragon Lord Ember?
She then nodded to her horde.
Amethyst? Smolder?
She greeted them. The two waved back in politeness.
So, why did you call for me?
Asked Ember.
Is it about Spike?
She asked, almost desperate to learn of what had happened. In the last 8 months, Elianza had told and shown the changes Spike had gone through, including his 3 molts. Elianza gave her a small, sad smile.
It is,
she answered gently.
He is finally awakened.
Ember's eyes went wide and tears formed at her edges. The other two also looked excited at the news. However, it was quickly quelled by Elianza's somber tone.
However,
she began,
something has happened to him. He in fact woke up yesterday, but we did not foresee an issue that has developed.
Worry filled Ember's heart, as did her horde.
Wait, so what issue?
Before she could answer, Spike called from the inside of the cave. Mother? Is she here? Without waiting for permission to enter, Ember quickly shot into the cave. Elianza cursed again inwardly, pursuing her in and was followed by the other two. Ember flew into the large cave, and it was at the center near the other dragoness was Spike. Ember stopped to a hover before dropping to her feet and staring at the Drake. She was in awe, happiness, and heartfelt as she looked at him. 8 months have passed, and in those 8 months, he has changed. She didn't watch it personally, but she would come to see his changes when she was alerted of them. He had grown in height, passing her by a few inches, and he was much broader now, bulkier, albeit more toned to a point, and wings sprouted from his shoulder blades, where they were much longer than he was tall. His snout was longer, with a sharp set of teeth that made her shiver. And lastly was his eyes, more slit than they were when he was smaller, not to mention that he had more depth to them. Their eyes met for a moment, and it was just a moment until Ember all but jumped at him. Spike never saw it coming as the Sapphire Dragoness almost tackled him to the floor in a strong emotional hug. She began to bawl her eyes out to him, almost incomprehensible babble coming from her. As this was happening, Spike was left confused and somewhat shocked that a Dragon Lord was crying, let alone crying on him. He looked past to his mother and saw that she too was conflicted on how to approach the situation. Ember, however, finally noticed, after a bit of holding him, that despite the heat radiating from his body, there was no warmth in return. She felt confused and wasn't sure what had caused it. Slowly separating himself from her, she looked at his eyes and saw confusion etched across his face. His features, his body, his whole outlook towards her made it seem as if he didn't recognize her. Shakily, she looked at him and wondered if that was true.
Spike?
He blinked and cocked his head. Yes, Dragon Lord Ember? Her heart instantly snapped and fear shot up her spine. Before she could fully break down her situation, Elienza quickly got between them.
My son, why don't you go and find some of our best gems for Dragon Lord Ember and her horde? It is impolite to allow such one as herself into our home without an offering.
Spike looked up at her and nodded. All right, Mother. He then looked at the conflicted Ember with warm eyes. Don't worry, I'll find the best one for you. With that, he turned around and walked towards his mother's pile, without much of a second thought. Out of ear's reach, Ember struggled to speak and stand. Her legs felt wobbly, and her heart felt cold. Fearing her fall, both Amethyst and Smolder quickly jumped to help her stand, with them easing her to a sitting position. Elienza sighed and sat on her own haunches.
As I said, there was an issue when he awoke.
Ember looked up at her somberly, tears running from her eyes.
He lost his memories,
she simply stated. Elienza nodded.
Just about everything. Over the months, me and Cynthia have been the only ones speaking to him about our past lives, as well as how we are his mothers in his sleep. We did not realize that he fell into a coma, and he had lost everything but what we had told him in his dreams,
she then quickly added.
If we had known that, I would have made sure that he would have remembered you, more importantly.
Ember felt conflict with a mix of emotions ranging from anger, to sadness, to pain, and frustration. Months of waiting for her consort. No, rather, the one that she loved, to return to her arms. But he's taken away from her again. How much pain did she have to endure in order to just be happy? Elienza felt for the younger dragoness and leaned in.
I'm sorry, Ember, truly, but I felt that it would be best if you were here. If he saw you, I thought maybe he would gain some memory back or possibly recognize you. But he didn't,
she stated a bit bitterly. Her anger surged a bit forwards towards the advisor.
He hasn't remembered anything other than you being his mother. That's something that he needed,
Elienza answered almost just as sharply, but she sighed and her voice softened. This caused the three younger dragons to gaze upon her in question.
I've seen his mind before he fell into a coma. I've seen his past and what ponies have done to him.
Her upper lip curled in a small anger.
How often they put him in danger, how much harm they have caused him physically and mentally, playing with him as if he was some sort of pet.
She shook her head in disgust.
No proper parents of their young would dare allow their young to endure such cruelty.
Ember seemed confused, but also distraught at the news that she was given. During her months of dealing with the bombardment of letters from the princesses, she read on how they cared for Spike, checking back on his status every few weeks. They constantly begged to be given access to approach and even try to help with Spike's coma, but she wasn't sure if their magic would work or make it worse.
But if it weren't for them, he wouldn't be here. None of us would be here as we are. It was the ponies that taught him how to be kind, how to be caring, loving, and more. But it was the same creatures that only taught him that, and that they also endangered him.
A small snort left her with a plume of smoke leaving her nostrils. The plume floated up to the ceiling where it dissipated.
The amount of times his life has been nearly lost, or the amount of times that they forget that he has even been of use, or that he hasn't received a hatch day, or birthday as they call them. Tell me, Lord Ember, do you believe that until his mind recovers, that we should let him know that he was raised by those who endangered him at youth? Or shall we continue to raise him properly, and how to be strong and powerful, but still keep him kind and loving at heart?
Ember didn't respond, for she didn't really know how to. She liked the idea of Spike being taught how to be a dragon, and how to stay strong, and even continue to be kind and caring. It's for that reason that she loved him, but why would it be right for them to ignore his past, remove it from him, and deny his return to his home? Her thoughts were interrupted with the approach of Spike and Cynthia, and in his arms, Spike held 3 large gems, a giant sapphire, an amethyst stone, and an amber diamond, each matching the dragoness's. He handed them out individually. I don't exactly know which ones you may like, so I kinda did it based on scale color. I hope none of you don't mind. Smolder and Amethyst looked delighted with their respective colors. After handing them out to them, he handed the giant sapphire to Ember, who looked at it with wonder. Being a Dragon Lord, she had no shortage of gems, rocks, and jewels of all kinds, yet what made this personal was that he handed it to her, by the one that she loved, yet she could say it to him, for he felt nothing back. It was truly heartbreaking, but with all the dexterity that she had remaining from earlier, she gave him a smile and held back tears.
Thank you, Spike. I apologize for what happened right now. I'm relieved that you're awake.
Spike gave a smile as he handed it to her. As am I, Lord Ember.
Please, just call me Ember.
Please, just call me Ember and say you remember, she thought. She then moved on to another topic.
I'm really glad that you are well, though from what your mother has told me, you're missing memories?
He nodded, feeling a bit shy. Yeah, Mother and Mama, they're trying to help with that. I want to remember all I can since my accident that they told me I had 8 months back. Ember shot an eye to Cynthia and from the corner of her eyes tried to make it known to Eliensa. It was brief, but it got through.
Well, I was there when it happened, and I hope that I can also help you gain your memories back as well. It is most important for you to gain them back.
She spoke a bit loud and with a small edge in her voice, targeted the 2 larger dragonesses.
I hope that with the help of your mothers, that they can help you remember everything that you need to.
She paused and brought a claw to his head, brushing it gently.
To come back to us, all and whole.
She saw a small reaction. His eyes glowed a bit, and he even looked lost into her own eyes with a gentle claw. He started to move in closer, wanting the feeling to last. However, he was left confused a bit more, his eyes betraying a hazy look. Was he remembering the first time that he was held like this by her, or was it the feeling of having something like that happen to him? Neither of them both knew for sure. He didn't respond to her, but just nodded. She smiled and then turned to her horde.
Unfortunately, I could only come briefly, and I must return to my duties. I hope for more updates from you and your mothers. Me and my horde will take this.
She lifted the gems and claws.
To go and enjoy them when we can.
She then turned to Eliensa and Cynthia, giving a small bow.
I thank you both for inviting me here in your home and hope that in the future that we could truly enjoy each other's company.
Bitterness was filling in her mouth that the only 2 dragonesses could detect, yet they not dared bite down at her. As is, this was a troubling meeting, no one expected.
We will try our best to educate our son with the past.
Eliensa commented lightly, not showing any emotion towards Ember.
And hopefully, more of your visits would be beneficial for all of us, especially Spike.
Spike nodded once more, but his gaze lingered on Ember, beginning to walk to the small trio of dragons out of the cave. Spike watched them go and he felt the pull more and more. Before she fully left, however, Ember turned around and quickly walked back to him, halting the others and waiting for her. Ember walked up to Spike, her amber eyes meeting his emerald ones. She spoke softly to him, gentle and warm, close to his head.
Please remember, whatever happened before, try and remember, but don't let it consume you. You have a good life here, a great one, but don't forget the one that you had before.
He didn't know how to answer her, but whatever happened next truly threw him off. Ember leaned in, briefly blowing a gentle flame over him that covered his face and dissipated quickly. He was surprised by it, like the first time he was hit with it, and he looked at Ember with awe. She gave him a smile, a sad one, but one that showed much more than sadness. She really wanted him to remember his past, and it showed that she was part of it. With that, she turned and headed back out of the cave. She gave a brief wave.
Goodbye, Spike. I hope to see you well soon.
He was still reeling from the kindle that he had just received from her, though he was able to give a small wave back. Goodbye, Ember. She smiled and walked out to meet her horde. The last few words were said to each party before the trio of dragonesses took off. Eliensa came back, a bit moody, and she seemed to be peeved, however managed to hide it, She looked at her mate and then at her son, giving him a smile. Looking at his mother, Spike briefly brushed his snout where she left her claw and the warm feeling on his face.
Mother?
He asked softly.
Yes, my son?
Is she really important to me? His mother nodded and lowered her head.
She is, my hatchling, more than you know. And she is right that we need to try everything to gain your memories back. But we need to do them slowly, as I've said.
His heart felt like it was being pulled and guided towards where Ember was at. That kindle touch that she left on him was somehow so very familiar and so warm. It was a hazy experience, something prior to his sleep, yet it was so wonderful and amazing that when she did it, something triggered at the back of his mind, a deep-rooted memory that briefly, only momentarily, brought a memory of him and her back. What was that? He remembered asking her.
It was a kindle touch, or kindling,
she told him. Yes, it was a kindle that she gave him, and he liked it. Actually, no, he loved it, and the warm feeling in his heart is what made it fluttering mad with something that he thought his mother's could give, but when Ember did it, it wasn't just kind or care. His mothers did it because they loved him, as any parent would. But this was something more. This felt like it was something that he felt was a part of his memory, and was the small piece of a very large puzzle that he needed to gain from his memory back. Kindling, he thought out loud. Both of his mothers looked at each other and smiled.
Yes, my son, she gave you a kindle touch, or kindling. If you remember correctly, that is what me and your mama do to each other. It's a sign of love and affection.
He nodded, and for some reason that made all the more confusing as to why she did it. Did Ember love him? Were they somehow close to each other? If they were, it made him feel horrible that he couldn't remember it. His eyes saddened, and at the moment, he wished to know what it would take to help him learn about Ember and himself. He would do anything to gain something that has been taken from him. He just hoped that if it was his past to be uncovered, would there be parts that he didn't like? A sudden memory came up to him where he encountered his first Kindle. It was sudden when it was done, and it was by her. Ember, he called out to her, quickly placing his claws on her arms. I'm not mad or anything, I don't understand. Why did you blow fire in my face?
Forgive me, Spike. I quickly forgot that you still don't understand all the dragon customs yet. For what I did, though, it was something personal, and only dragons that have affections for one another do.
I kind of like it. I'm glad that you like me that much, Ember. He remembered that very vividly, and it was Ember who gave him that Kindle. Ember. Ember and her horde all landed back inside of their cave, where Ember immediately dropped to her knees with a sob leaving her. Amethyst and Smolder are quickly by her side, supporting her. She then finally broke and began to cry, with the two dragonesses holding her as best as possible. Spike had awakened, but he hadn't really come back to her.